The screen flickered once, then again. The radar operator leaned forward in his chair, his face washed in the pale green glow of the display, and watched a contact appear where nothing should have been. It was not moving like an aircraft. It was not squawking a transponder code. It was not following any published airway, any known flight path, any trajectory that the software was designed to interpret. It was simply there, a hard return, bright and steady, sitting at an altitude that didn't make sense, holding a position that no known airframe could hold, and doing it all with the quiet indifference of something that did not care whether anyone was watching. He checked his settings. He cross-referenced with adjacent systems. He called his supervisor over. They looked at the screen together. The contact was still there. It had not drifted. It had not faded. It had not resolved itself into the familiar signature of a commercial airliner at the wrong altitude or a weather balloon caught in an unexpected current. It was holding position with the kind of precision that implied intent, and that more than anything was what made the hair on the back of his neck stand up. Then it moved. Not gradually. Not with the slow acceleration of a conventional aircraft building speed on a heading. It moved the way a light moves when you flick a switch from here to there with nothing in between. One sweep of the radar, it was at one coordinate. The next sweep, it was 14 miles away. The system recorded both positions. The system did not record the transit. As far as the radar was concerned, the object had ceased to exist in one location and begun to exist in another, and the distance between those two facts was a question that no one in the room could answer. The operator reached for his comm panel. His hand was steady. His voice when he spoke was calm and professional, the voice of a man trained to report what he sees, not what he feels. But what he felt was something he would carry for years. The quiet, unmistakable certainty that he was looking at something he had never seen before, and that no one was going to be able to tell him what it was. Throughout modern military history, trained personnel, radar operators, fighter pilots, security forces, weapons officers, base commanders have occasionally reported encounters that official investigations struggled to fully explain. These events were not rumors. They were not campfire stories traded among bored soldiers on quiet deployments. They were documented in real time on official equipment by credentialed professionals operating within the most technologically advanced military apparatus in human history. They generated incident reports, radar photographs, audio recordings, infrared footage, and sworn testimony. They were investigated by official programs, reviewed by intelligence analysts, and in most cases, given rational explanations that satisfied the requirements of the bureaucratic process. But for the people who witnessed them, the men and women who stood in the forest, who flew the intercept, who watched the scope, the experience itself raised questions that the official explanations did not fully resolve. Not because those explanations were dishonest. Not because there was a conspiracy to suppress the truth, but because there is sometimes a gap between what an investigation concludes and what a witness knows they saw. A gap that is too small to be scandalous, too large to be comfortable, and too persistent to be forgotten. This is the account of 3 such incidents. Each occurred within the context of routine military operations. Each involved multiple witnesses with professional training in observation and reporting. Each was investigated by official bodies and given an official explanation. And each, decades later, continues to generate questions that remain, by any honest measure, difficult to fully answer. The first took place in a dense English forest on a cold December night in 1980. The second unfolded in the skies off the coast of Southern California on a bright November afternoon in 2004. The third occurred over the frozen plains of North Dakota on an October night in 1968. They share no geography. They share no personnel. They are separated by decades, by service branch, by operational context, and by the technology available at the time of each event. But they share something else, something harder to categorize and harder to dismiss. In each case, what was reported did not match what was expected. And in each case, the people who were there have never stopped saying so. In December of 1980, the twin Royal Air Force bases of Woodbridge and Bentwaters sat in the quiet Suffolk countryside of eastern England, surrounded by farmland and dense pine forest. Despite their British designation, both bases were, for all practical purposes, American installations, home to the 81st Tactical Fighter Wing of the United States Air Force, a frontline NATO unit operating within the broader architecture of Cold War deterrence. The personnel stationed there were professionals. Many were combat veterans. All held security clearances appropriate to their duties, which, given the strategic significance of the bases, were not trivial. The forest between the two installations, Rendlesham Forest, was a thick, quiet expanse of Corsican pine, its floor carpeted with needles and bracken, its canopy dense enough to block most ambient light. At night, under cloud cover, it was almost completely dark. Security patrols occasionally moved through the perimeter areas, but the forest itself was not a place where people generally went without reason. In the early hours of December 26, 1980, the night after Christmas, a reason presented itself. At approximately 3 in the morning, personnel at the east gate of RAF Woodbridge observed unusual lights descending into the forest beyond the perimeter fence. The lights were initially interpreted as a possible aircraft in distress, a not unreasonable assumption given the proximity of the bases to commercial and military flight paths. A security patrol was dispatched to investigate. Among those who responded were Staff Sergeant Jim Peniston and Airman First Class John Burroughs. Both were security policemen trained, experienced, and accustomed to operating in low-light conditions. What they expected to find was a downed aircraft, or perhaps a signal flare, or perhaps nothing at all. What they reported finding was something else entirely. According to Peniston's account, documented in his official statement, filed with the base and later submitted to the United Kingdom's Ministry of Defense, the patrol moved into the forest on foot, following the lights through the trees. As they advanced, their radio communications became intermittent, disrupted by static that did not correspond to any known source of interference. The air felt charged, a sensation that Peniston described as similar to the static electricity one feels before a thunderstorm, except that the night was cold and clear. They reached a small clearing. In it, Peniston reported, was a craft, not a crashed airplane, not a helicopter. A small, triangular object approximately 3 meters across and 2 meters high, resting on the forest floor or hovering just above it. Its surface appeared smooth and dark, and it was illuminated by a pulsing light that seemed to emanate from the object itself rather than from any external source. Peniston stated that he approached the object closely enough to observe markings on its surface, symbols that he described as resembling inscriptions or hieroglyphic-like characters. He further stated that he touched the surface of the craft. It was smooth and warm. Then, according to his account, the object lifted from the ground, moved slowly through the trees, and accelerated into the sky. It was gone within seconds. Burroughs corroborated the essential elements of Peniston's account, although his perspective differed in certain details. A discrepancy that investigators have noted is actually consistent with genuine eyewitness testimony, where two people observing the same event from slightly different vantage points will typically report slightly different versions of the same core experience. The incident might have ended there, an unusual report filed and forgotten, had it not been for what happened over the following 2 nights. On the night of December 27th into the 28th, Lieutenant Colonel Charles Halt, the deputy base commander of RAF Woodbridge, was informed that the lights had returned. Halt was a career Air Force officer, a Vietnam veteran, and a man whose professional reputation was built on competence, sobriety, and a low tolerance for nonsense. He did not believe the initial reports. He went into the forest to put the matter to rest. He brought a team. He brought equipment, including a Geiger counter, a night vision scope, and a portable audio recorder. That recorder would become one of the most analyzed pieces of audio evidence in the history of military anomaly investigation. The recording, known subsequently as the Halt tape, captures approximately 18 minutes of the team's movement through the forest. Halt's voice is audible throughout and his tone is striking. He is not panicked, he is not theatrical. He sounds like exactly what he is, a senior military officer conducting a field investigation under unusual circumstances. His narration is clipped, professional, and increasingly bewildered. On the tape, Halt describes seeing lights moving through the trees. He describes a red, sun-like light that appeared to drip molten material. He directs his team's attention to objects in the sky that appear to be sending beams of light toward the ground, including, he noted, toward the weapons storage area of the base. His voice, across the duration of the recording, shifts from controlled skepticism to something closer to genuine astonishment. At one point, he can be heard saying, almost to himself, words that reflect a man confronting something outside his frame of reference. The team took radiation readings at the site where Peniston had reported the craft 2 nights earlier. 3 shallow depressions were found in the frozen ground, arranged in a triangular pattern, each approximately 7 inches in diameter. The Geiger counter registered readings that were moderately above normal background levels, not dramatically elevated, but higher than the surrounding area. The readings were documented. In the weeks and months that followed, the incident was investigated through multiple channels. Halt himself drafted a memorandum, now publicly available, addressed to the UK Ministry of Defence, summarising the events in restrained, factual language. The memo described the lights, the craft, the radiation readings, and the physical evidence. It did not offer an interpretation. It simply reported what had occurred. The official explanations that eventually emerged attributed the sightings to a combination of factors. The Orford Ness Lighthouse, a rotating beacon located approximately 5 miles from the forest, was identified as a probable source of the lights observed moving through the trees. A bright meteor, recorded entering the atmosphere over southern England during the early hours of December 26th, was cited as a possible trigger for the initial sighting. Bright stars visible through the tree canopy in atmospheric conditions that could produce scintillation and color shifting were offered as an explanation for the lights observed on subsequent nights. The ground depressions were attributed to rabbit diggings. The radiation readings, while above background, were assessed as not significant enough to indicate an anomalous source. Each of these explanations addresses a component of the reported events. The lighthouse is real. The meteor is documented. Stars do scintillate, rabbits do dig, But the witnesses, Peniston, Burroughs, Halt, and others, have consistently maintained that the explanations do not account for what they experienced. Peniston did not describe a lighthouse beam. He described a solid physical object at close range. Halt did not describe twinkling stars. He described structured lights performing maneuvers that no astronomical body could perform. The radiation readings, while modest, were concentrated in a specific pattern at a specific location, a distribution that random environmental radiation does not typically produce. Lieutenant Colonel Halt, who retired from the Air Force as a full colonel, has stated publicly and repeatedly that what he witnessed in Rendlesham Forest was not a lighthouse, not a meteor, and not a star. He has been careful in his language. He has not claimed to know what the object was. But he has been unequivocal about what it was not. And he has expressed frustration, measured professional frustration, with what he perceives as a gap between the seriousness of the event and the adequacy of the official response. He is not alone. Dozens of personnel stationed at the twin bases during that period have, over the years, provided accounts that align with the core narrative. Not all of them saw the same things. Not all of them were in the forest. But enough of them reported enough overlapping details to create a body of testimony that, at minimum, suggests the incident was more complex than the official explanation allows. The Rendlesham Forest incident remains one of the most extensively documented military anomaly cases in history. It has been the subject of parliamentary questions in the United Kingdom, Freedom of Information Act requests in the United States, and ongoing debate among researchers, skeptics, and the witnesses themselves. The official file is closed. The official explanation is on record. And the men who were there, who walked into that forest carrying weapons and flashlights and the expectation of finding something ordinary, have never stopped insisting that what they found was anything but. 24 years later and 5,000 miles to the west, a different kind of encounter unfolded, not in a dark forest on a cold night, but in broad daylight over the open Pacific Ocean, observed not by security policemen on foot patrol, but by some of the most highly trained fighter pilots in the world, flying some of the most advanced combat aircraft ever built. In November of 2004, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group was conducting a routine training exercise off the coast of Southern California. The strike group included the aircraft carrier USS Nimitz, the guided missile cruiser USS Princeton, and several escort vessels, along with their associated air wings. The Princeton was equipped with the Spy-1B radar system, one of the most capable naval radar platforms in existence, designed to track hundreds of airborne targets simultaneously with a degree of precision that makes it one of the most trusted sensor systems in the United States military. For several days prior to the primary incident, the Princeton's radar operators had been tracking a series of anomalous contacts. The objects appeared at high altitude, typically around 80,000 feet, and descended rapidly to lower altitudes, sometimes near the ocean surface, before either hovering or accelerating away. The radar returns were consistent and repeatable. They were not transient artifacts. They were not weather phenomena. They appeared on multiple sweeps across multiple watch cycles and were observed by multiple operators who independently confirmed what the system was showing them. The behavior of the contacts was, by any conventional standard, extraordinary. The descents from high altitude to sea level occurred in a matter of seconds, implying rates of speed and acceleration that no known aircraft, manned or unmanned, could survive, let alone sustain. The objects showed no visible propulsion signatures. They displayed no transponder codes. They did not respond to radio communication. They were, in every functional sense, unidentified. On November 14th, the strike group's commanding officers decided to investigate. 2 FA-18F Super Hornets were vectored toward the most recent radar contact. The lead aircraft was piloted by Commander David Fravor, a veteran naval aviator with more than 16 years of flying experience and multiple combat deployments. His wingman was Lieutenant Commander Alex Dietrich, an equally experienced and respected pilot. What happened next has been described by both Fravor and Dietrich in multiple interviews, congressional testimony, and official debriefs. Their accounts are consistent with each other and with the radar data recorded by the Princeton. As the two jets descended toward the coordinates provided by the Princeton, Fravor noticed a disturbance on the ocean surface below, an area of agitated whitewater, roughly the size of a 737 aircraft, as though something large was just beneath the surface. Above this disturbance, hovering at approximately 50 feet, was an object. Fravor described it as white, oblong, and approximately 40 feet in length, roughly the size and shape of a large breath mint or a tic-tac. It had no visible wings, no visible propulsion, no visible control surfaces, no exhaust plume, no markings. It was simply there, suspended in the air over the churning water, moving in a lateral pattern that Fravor described as erratic but purposeful, as though it were aware of its environment and responding to it. Fravor made the decision to descend for a closer look. As he began his approach, the object appeared to respond. It rose to meet him, mirroring his descent with an ascent of its own. For a brief period, seconds, not minutes, the two were engaged in what Fravor has described as something resembling a dogfight geometry, with the object matching his maneuvers in a way that suggested awareness of his aircraft's position and intent. Then it accelerated, not gradually, not with the building thrust of a jet engine or a rocket motor. It moved from a near hover to a velocity that took it beyond visual range in less than 2 seconds. Fravor estimated the acceleration was beyond anything he had encountered in his career. The Princeton's radar confirmed what Fravor saw. The object reappeared on the radar scope approximately 60 miles away at the strike group's combat air patrol point, a pre-designated coordinate that the object should have had no way of knowing. It had covered 60 miles in a matter of seconds. Fravor and Dietrich returned to the Nimitz. A second pair of aircraft was launched, and one of those jets, equipped with an advanced targeting forward-looking infrared pod, captured video footage of an object matching the description Fravor had provided. The footage, which would later become known as the FLIR-1 video, shows a small, oblong object moving against the wind, with no visible propulsion, rotating or maneuvering in a way that the targeting system struggled to maintain lock-on. The video is short, grainy by consumer standards, but its provenance is beyond dispute. It was recorded on a military-grade infrared system operated by a trained weapons systems officer aboard a United States Navy combat aircraft. The footage was classified. The incident was documented internally, and for 13 years it remained largely unknown outside of military and intelligence circles. In 2017, the New York Times published a report revealing the existence of the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program, a Pentagon initiative that had, among other things, investigated the Nimitz encounter. The FLIR-1 video was released to the public. Fravor and Dietrich both spoke on the record. The story entered the public discourse in a way that few military anomaly incidents ever have, not through fringe publications or conspiracy forums, but through mainstream journalism and eventually through the halls of Congress itself. The Department of Defense officially acknowledged the video's authenticity. The object depicted in it was classified as an unidentified aerial phenomenon, the modern terminology that has replaced the older and more culturally loaded term. The Pentagon did not claim to know what the object was. It stated that the incident remained unexplained. Official assessments have considered multiple possibilities. Sensor artifacts, the idea that the radar and infrared returns were generated by atmospheric conditions, electronic interference, or software anomalies, have been examined and largely set aside by the operators who were present, who maintain that the returns were consistent, repeatable, and corroborated across multiple independent sensor platforms. Atmospheric effects, including unusual temperature inversions or ducting phenomena that can bend radar signals and create false returns, have been discussed, but do not account for the visual sighting by Fravor and Dietrich, both of whom observed the object with their own eyes in clear daylight conditions. The possibility of advanced foreign technology, a drone or experimental aircraft operated by a rival nation, has been considered but raises its own set of difficult questions. Chief among them how any known or theorized propulsion system could produce the performance characteristics described. Commander Fravor has been direct in his assessments. He has stated in language that is characteristically blunt for a career fighter pilot that the object he observed outperformed his FA-18 by a margin that was not incremental but categorical. It did not simply fly faster or turn tighter than his aircraft. It operated in a manner that appeared to disregard the physical constraints, gravity, inertia, atmospheric friction, that govern the flight of every known aircraft on Earth. He has been careful to note that he does not claim to know what the object was. He claims only to know what he saw. And what he saw, he maintains, was not any aircraft, drone, or weapons system in any nation's known inventory. Lieutenant Commander Dietrich has been equally measured. In her public statements, she has emphasized the professionalism of the observation, the fact that they were not looking for anomalies, that they were conducting a routine training intercept, and that their accounts were consistent with each other and with the sensor data. She has acknowledged the strangeness of the encounter without embellishing it. Her credibility, like Fravor's, rests not on the extraordinariness of her claim, but on the ordinariness of her qualifications. These are not people who chase unusual phenomena. They are people who were doing their jobs when something unusual found them. The Nimitz encounter remains, as of this writing, officially unexplained. The videos have been authenticated. The witnesses have testified before Congress. The radar data has been reviewed by multiple analysts, and the object, whatever it was, has never been identified. If the Nimitz encounter benefits from the clarity of modern sensor technology and the credibility of contemporary witnesses willing to speak publicly, the third incident exists in a different register entirely. Older, quieter, and buried deeper in the archives of a program that the Air Force would later close with an official conclusion that it had found nothing of scientific value. On the night of October 24, 1968, a B-52H Stratofortress assigned to the 5th Bomb Wing at Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota was conducting a routine calibration flight. The mission was unremarkable. The aircraft was flying a standard pattern at altitude, testing navigation and weapons systems in the cold, clear air above the northern Great Plains. The crew consisted of experienced airmen, men who had logged thousands of hours in one of the largest and most complex aircraft in the Air Force inventory. They knew what the sky looked like at night. They knew what radar returns were supposed to look like. And they knew the difference between a normal flight and something that wasn't. At approximately 3:30 in the morning, the aircraft's radar operator detected an unknown target. The contact appeared on the scope at a range of approximately 3 miles, holding a position that indicated it was either stationary or moving at the same speed and heading as the B-52, in other words, pacing them. The return was solid and consistent, not the diffuse, flickering signature of weather or atmospheric clutter. It behaved on the radar like a physical object of significant size. The radar operator reported the contact to the aircraft commander. The crew began visual scanning of the area. Within minutes, multiple crew members observed a large, luminous object in the sky, a bright light, far larger and more intense than any star or planet, holding a fixed position relative to the aircraft. The object appeared to be at roughly the same altitude as the B-52, and its position correlated with the radar return. This was significant. Radar contacts alone can be ambiguous. Atmospheric phenomena, electronic interference, and equipment anomalies can all produce false returns. But when a radar contact is confirmed by simultaneous visual observation, when the crew can see with their own eyes an object in the same location where the radar says an object exists, the event crosses a threshold. It becomes what investigators call a radar visual case, and such cases are, by the standards of any serious analytical framework, considerably harder to dismiss. The object paced the B-52 for an extended period. The crew continued to observe it on radar and visually. Radar photographs were taken, images of the radar scope showing the unknown return alongside the known returns of terrain features and other aircraft. These photographs were preserved and later submitted as part of the official investigation. On the ground, the situation was developing in parallel. Minot Air Force Base's security teams had been reporting unusual activity throughout the night. Personnel at several of the base's missile launch facilities, the underground silos housing Minuteman intercontinental ballistic missiles, reported seeing unusual lights in the sky. Some described a large, bright object hovering at low altitude. Others reported lights that moved in patterns inconsistent with conventional aircraft. The reports came from multiple independent locations spread across the missile field, which covered hundreds of square miles of North Dakota prairie. The witnesses were not in communication with each other at the time of their observations. They reported what they saw through their respective chains of command, and the accounts were compiled after the fact. The convergence of airborne radar detection, airborne visual observation, and independent ground-based visual reports created a body of evidence that was, by the standards of the era, unusually robust. This was not a single witness seeing a light in the sky. This was a military aircraft detecting a physical object on calibrated radar, its crew confirming that object visually, and ground personnel at multiple locations independently reporting anomalous lights in the same general area during the same time window. The incident was investigated by Project Blue Book, the Air Force's official program for investigating reports of unidentified flying objects, which had been operational since 1952. The Blue Book file on the Minot case is extensive, running to hundreds of pages and including the radar photographs, crew statements, ground personnel reports, and analytical assessments. The official conclusion was ambiguous. The case was categorized in a way that attributed aspects of the sighting to different conventional explanations. The visual observations by ground personnel were assessed as possible misidentification of stars or other aircraft. The radar return was attributed to possible atmospheric phenomena, temperature inversions, or anomalous propagation that can cause radar signals to bend and produce returns from objects or surfaces that are not in the expected line of sight. The visual observation by the B-52 crew was not fully addressed in the final assessment. This ambiguity is itself notable. Project Blue Book categorized cases as either identified, meaning a conventional explanation was found, or unidentified, meaning no satisfactory explanation could be determined. The Minot case exists in a gray area within the Blue Book files, where the assigned explanations do not comfortably account for the totality of the evidence. Atmospheric propagation can produce false radar returns, but it does not typically produce returns that pace an aircraft at a fixed distance for an extended period. Stars can be misidentified by ground observers, but the B-52 crew were not observing from the ground. They were at altitude with a clear frame of reference, and what they reported was not a point of light on the horizon, but a large, luminous object holding position at their altitude. The radar photographs show a return that is consistent, localized, and distinct from the surrounding clutter, characteristics that atmospheric anomalies do not reliably produce. Project Blue Book was closed in 1969, 1 year after the Minot incident, with the official conclusion that no investigation of reported aerial phenomena had produced evidence of a threat to national security or evidence of technology beyond known scientific knowledge. The program's closure was based in part on the recommendations of the Condon Committee, a University of Colorado study commissioned by the Air Force, which concluded that further investigation of such reports was unlikely to yield scientifically valuable results. The Minot case was filed. The B-52 crew returned to duty. The ground personnel resumed their watch over the missile fields. The radar photographs were archived. And the question of what had placed a nuclear-armed bomber over the plains of North Dakota on a cold October night was officially considered answered. Whether it was actually answered is a different matter. The airmen who were aboard that aircraft have, in the decades since, maintained that what they observed was not a star, not an atmospheric phenomenon, and not a radar malfunction. They saw something. Their instruments confirmed it. And the explanation they were given did not, in their professional judgment, match what they experienced. This is not an accusation. It is an observation, and it is one that the witnesses themselves have made with a consistency that, if nothing else, speaks to the depth of the impression the event left on them. These were men who flew strategic bombers during the Cold War, men whose daily professional reality involved the most consequential weapons systems on Earth. They were not given to exaggeration. They did not seek publicity. Most of them said nothing for years, but when asked, and they have been asked by researchers, by historians, by journalists, they have said the same thing. Something was out there that night, and no one has ever told them what it was. 3 incidents, 3 decades, 3 completely different operational contexts: a forest in England, an ocean off California, a sky over North Dakota. In each case, the basic structure is the same. Trained military personnel, operating in a professional capacity, encountered something that did not conform to their expectations or their experience. They reported what they observed through official channels. Their reports were investigated, explanations were provided, and in each case, the witnesses, people whose careers depended on accurate observation and reliable judgment, maintained that the explanations did not fully account for what they had seen. The temptation when confronted with such accounts is to gravitate toward one of 2 poles. The first is credulity, the assumption that because trained observers reported something unusual, the something must therefore be extraordinary in nature. This is a logical error. Trained observers are human beings, subject to the same perceptual limitations, cognitive biases, and physiological vulnerabilities as everyone else. Training reduces the likelihood of misperception. It does not eliminate it. The second pole is dismissal, the assumption that because every unusual observation must have a conventional explanation, the conventional explanation must therefore be correct, regardless of how well it fits the evidence. This, too, is a logical error. The existence of a possible explanation is not the same as the confirmation of that explanation. A lighthouse beam is a possible explanation for lights in a forest. It is not a confirmed explanation if the witnesses who were present, standing within feet of the alleged source of confusion, insist that what they saw was not a beam of light from 5 miles away but a physical object at close range. To accept the lighthouse explanation without addressing the discrepancy is not skepticism. It is convenience. The honest position, the position that respects both the evidence and the limitations of the evidence, lies somewhere between these poles. And it begins with a few acknowledgments. First, sensor systems are imperfect. Radar can produce false returns. Infrared cameras can misinterpret thermal data. Night vision devices can amplify ambient light in ways that create visual artifacts. These are documented, well-understood phenomena. Any serious analysis of a military anomaly case must account for the possibility that the instruments were wrong, that what the screen showed was not what was actually there. Second, human perception is imperfect. The eye is not a camera. The brain is not a passive receiver of information. Under conditions of stress, fatigue, darkness, cold, altitude, or sensory deprivation, the human perceptual system can generate experiences that feel entirely real but do not correspond to external physical events. Phantom sounds, misidentified shapes, distorted distances. These are not signs of weakness or incompetence. They are features of human neurology, and they apply to everyone, including elite military professionals. Third, memory is imperfect. The act of remembering is not like playing back a recording. It is a reconstructive process subject to distortion, embellishment, and contamination, particularly when the memory is emotionally charged, when it is revisited frequently, and when it is discussed with others who were present. This does not mean that all eyewitness testimony is unreliable. It means that eyewitness testimony, even from the most credible sources, must be weighed against physical evidence and analyzed with an awareness of its inherent limitations. Fourth, the military environment itself can contribute to misperception. Cold War anxiety, operational fatigue, the psychological weight of guarding nuclear weapons or flying strategic bombers, the isolation of remote postings, the adrenaline of a training intercept that suddenly becomes something unexpected. These are not trivial factors. They shape the mental state of the observer, and they can influence what is perceived, what is remembered, and how both are reported. All of these factors are real. All of them are relevant, and none of them individually or collectively constitute a complete explanation for the three incidents described here, because in each case the anomaly was not limited to a single observer or a single sensor. In Rendlesham, multiple witnesses across multiple nights reported observations that were consistent in their core details. In the Nimitz encounter, the object was detected on the Princeton Spy 1 radar, observed visually by two experienced pilots in broad daylight, and captured on a military infrared targeting system, three independent sensor modalities producing corroborating data. In Minot, the unknown object was detected on the B-52's airborne radar, observed visually by the flight crew, and independently reported by ground personnel at separate locations. Multi-sensor, multi-witness cases are rare, and they are, by any analytical standard, harder to explain away than single observer events. When a radar return is confirmed by a visual sighting, the probability that both are errors decreases significantly. When that radar-visual combination is further corroborated by an infrared camera or by independent ground observers, the probability decreases further still. This does not mean the event is unexplainable. It means the explanation must account for a richer and more demanding body of evidence than a simple perceptual error or equipment glitch would require. Many military anomalies do eventually receive logical explanations. A strange light turns out to be a satellite re-entry. An unusual radar return turns out to be a weather balloon at an unexpected altitude. A mysterious sound turns out to be the acoustic signature of a distant military exercise. The vast majority of reported anomalies, when investigated thoroughly, resolve into the ordinary. This is not surprising. The world is full of phenomena that look strange from one angle and mundane from another. The job of investigation is to find the angle that makes the mundane visible. But some incidents resist that resolution, not because the investigation was inadequate, not because the truth is being suppressed, but because the evidence, taken as a whole, does not point cleanly toward any single explanation, and because the witnesses, whose professional lives demanded precision and honesty, have never been willing to accept an answer they believe to be incomplete. These cases do not prove anything extraordinary. They do not confirm the existence of unknown technologies or unknown intelligences. They do not justify conspiracy theories or sensational claims. What they do is something more modest and, in its own way, more important. They demonstrate that there are moments, rare, brief, and unsettling, when the systems we rely on to understand the world around us produce data that we cannot fully interpret. Moments when the radar says one thing, the eyes say the same thing, and the explanation says something else. Moments when the gap between what was observed and what was concluded is small enough to overlook but large enough to matter. Modern military operations are built on a foundation of advanced technology and trained human judgment. Radar systems that can track a target the size of a golf ball at 200 miles. Infrared sensors that can detect a temperature differential of a fraction of a degree. Pilots who have spent thousands of hours learning to distinguish a threat from a phantom, a real contact from a false return, a genuine anomaly from the ordinary strangeness of operating in a complex environment. These systems and these people are not perfect. They were never meant to be. They are meant to be good enough, reliable enough, accurate enough, and honest enough to support decisions that carry life and death consequences. And in the overwhelming majority of cases, they are exactly that. The radar works. The pilot sees what is there. The report reflects what happened. The system functions as designed, but occasionally, rarely, unpredictably, and without pattern, that system encounters something it was not designed for. Not a failure, not a malfunction. Something more like a boundary, an edge case. A moment where the instrument faithfully records something that the analyst cannot identify, where the pilot clearly sees something that the manual does not describe, where the evidence is too solid to dismiss and too strange to categorize. In most cases, given enough time and enough data, the explanation eventually becomes clear. The anomaly reveals itself as a known phenomenon viewed from an unfamiliar angle. The mystery dissolves into the ordinary as most mysteries do. That is the way science works, that is the way investigation works, and that is the way it should work. But sometimes, in a forest in Suffolk over the Pacific Ocean above the plains of North Dakota, the investigation runs its course, the report is filed, the explanation is entered into the record, and the case is officially closed. And the question quietly remains, not loud, not dramatic. Not the kind of question that demands an answer at gunpoint, or justifies a headline in capital letters. Just a small, persistent, honest question, the kind that a radar operator carries with him after a 30-year career, the kind that a fighter pilot thinks about when the sky is very clear and very empty, the kind that a security policeman turns over in his mind on quiet nights when the forest is dark and the wind moves through the pines in a way that sounds, for just a moment, like something he heard once before. They filed their reports. They told the truth as they understood it. They accepted the conclusions of investigations they may not have fully agreed with, because that is what professionals do. And they moved on to new assignments, new deployments, new chapters of careers built on discipline and service. But they remember. Every one of them remembers. And if you ask them, really ask them without cameras or agendas, in the quiet of a conversation where nothing is at stake except honesty, they will tell you the same thing in their own words, in their own way, with the careful precision of people who spent their lives being trained to observe and report. They saw something. Their instruments confirmed it. And no one, not the investigation, not the official file, not the decades of distance, has ever fully explained what it was. That isn't a conspiracy. It isn't a scandal. It isn't proof of anything beyond the limits of what we currently understand. It's just a question, and it's still open.